Good morning, everybody. I have 9 o'clock. That one doesn't work. So, but my iPhone tells me that it's 9 o'clock. So welcome to Senate Education Committee. And we are going to start with House Bill 1125 relative to school emergency plans. And that's Representative Cordelli will introduce it. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair Ward. Thank you, committee members. Nice to be with you again. My name is Glenn Cordelli, State Representative representing Tufton Borough, Moulton Borough, and Sandwich in the beautiful Lakes region. And I'm here on House Bill 1125, which is really just a reflection of reality, if you would say. Several years ago, we passed legislation requiring emergency plans to be sent from the school districts to the Department of Education so that everyone was aware of building plans, et cetera, in the case of an emergency. The department then, the plan would send them to Homeland Security. The way it has worked out, however, is that they really go to Homeland Security and the Department of Safety first. So in this legislation, we tried to reflect that, but also indicate that access to all the plans would be available to the Department of Education. And it's my understanding that the Department of Safety has moved to make these plans available online. And that, I believe, is reflected in lines 9 and 10. The Director of Homeland Security did come before our House Education Committee, but was unable to attend our executive session and did have some additional thoughts on language that I think Senator Prentice has been working with her on that and might have something coming forward in the future, but I hope that you will look favorably on HB 1125. Thank you very much.
Questions from the committee members? Senator Prentice.
Thank you, Senator Ward. Not a question for Representative Cordelli. I just wanted to follow up, and I've been in touch with him, and I've been working with the Director of Homeland Security Emergency Management in New Hampshire, Jennifer Harper. She just wanted to make sure, and I'll be bringing forward a committee amendment. It's at OLS, and I've shared the language with Representative Cordelli, that the language and the process aligns with the way that they do aligns with the operations at Homeland Security. So there's some different language that needs to be plugged in here, but it's the same philosophically and content-wise the same, just aligning the language with Homeland Security operations. So I have an amendment at OLS. I've run it by Representative Cordelli and signed off by the Department of Safety. So I'll have that ready for you.
Thank you very much.
And I shared that draft with several people at the department as well. Department of Education, that is.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments from the committee members? Senator Khan.
Just, Madam Chair, just to reassure us that Homeland Security and Department of Education will be available for questions.
I believe that's the case.
Yeah.
Homeland Security's.
I know.
Oh, sorry.
It's
She's just
here.
getting ushered out, so I'm trying to. Getting kicked out. So do you need me?
I don't know. I have a list of people who like to speak, so.
I signed up to speak.
Okay.
Okay. I'll wait outside. Thank you. We'll just switch seats. Thanks.
Let me go through the list of people who like to speak. And Representative Ladd. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Cordelli.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and members of the Senate Education Committee. For the record, my name is Rick Ladd. I chair House Education. I hail from Haverhill, New Hampshire. I, too, am in support of this bill. There are several areas which I'd like just to focus on, primarily in regard to what's being proposed by Senator Prentice and by way of the director behind me. There's a portion here where if you don't have your report in to DOS in 2 consecutive years, you shall notify the Department of Education. I feel that when I am chair of the Infrastructure Commission for the state, where we've had the $30 million, where we've given support to schools for safety, security, infrastructure needs. When we initially got into that before Jennifer was on board, when Perry Plummer was director, we found that there are a huge number of districts which were non-compliant and not submitting their plans in a timely manner. We found out it was well in excess of 50%, closer to 80% had not complied. When we let them know that we would not be awarding any of these grants to any district that did not have their applications in or their response plans submitted in a timely manner and submitted period, you would not be eligible for a grant. Within 2 weeks, we got them all in, and because they were chasing the 30 million bucks. So I would say right here that there has to be communication with the department, not after we've had 2 years of not complying, but we have, if they're not compliant, there should be communication with the department immediately so that the department can know and start letting people know these need to be in. And there's a purpose for them. So that's my only concern that I had. I wanted to present that to you, Madam Clerk, or Chair, excuse me. It's a Tuesday, feels like a Monday after Kansas beat North Carolina. And so it was a long night. So thank you very much. If there are any questions, I'll be glad to take them.
Questions from the committee members? Seeing none, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Glad. Amy Clark.
Good morning. For the record, my name is Amy Clark, and I'm with the Department of Education. The only thing I really want to, I'm really here for questions, if you have questions, but I just want to point out for this bill, the proposed bill removes the Department of Education from that notification, and that does actually help out the Department of Education because there's a lot of duplicate work when people are submitting. Homeland Security has a secure portal that districts upload to, and that works really well for the Department of Education. So that contact, having schools directly communicate with Homeland Security is much better than having them do both. The plans are sensitive information, so, and they are large, so and there are over 600 schools, so you can imagine my desk with 600 plans on them, and I can't just toss them in the trash, I have to shred them. So just keep in mind that that is it seems like a minor change, but that is actually helpful to the Department of Education. I have also, I don't know if it's appropriate, but I have also seen the proposed amendment, and I would just say that similarly, that proposed amendment continues that that direct notification from schools to the Homeland Security, so the department would be in support of that piece as well.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the committee members? Senator Khan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Morning.
Morning.
So are there, Representative Ladd essentially was suggesting a carrot and stick approach. Are there some carrots that ought to be in that amendment? For instance, a school district would not be qualified for state capital improvements without having a current safety plan on file. Anyway, I'm wondering if we don't have the $30 million security pool of dollars available, what are those possible carrots that could be put into this bill?
Yeah, that's a good question. Carrots are a good way to talk about it since there's not a lot of sticks that we have. Keep in mind that 100% of our schools have submitted their emergency operation plan at one point in time. So we have, whereas before with the Public School Infrastructure Fund, that was the first real big push to get them to submit those plans. And now it's a matter of fine-tuning those plans, so I'm not necessarily sure that there's a big need to amend the language to put any additional carrots. That probably was a good approach for the Public School Infrastructure Fund. Their language themselves could say, before you apply for this grant, we're going to make sure that you have your emergency operation plan on file. But I think it might get more complicated in this issue because it might depend on which grant it is. So I don't necessarily see a need to put any additional language for, in this.
Follow up?
Different question. One of the greatest threats that schools or any of our public facilities face is technological infrastructure. And so while maybe 4, 5, 6 years ago when the safety fund and this act was put in place, I think there are other security risks that our schools face. And have we given any thought to that kind of emergency response plan that ought to be considered as we are doing this review?
That's a probably good question Director Harper could follow up on. I do know that in the proposed amendment that I've seen just this morning, I do believe that it did talk about cyber attacks, and I know that that's part of Homeland Security's approach as well. So, but I'll let Department of Homeland Security talk more about that.
All right, good insights. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I have Representative Tanner supports the bill, doesn't want to speak, and Representative Hobson supports the bill and doesn't want to speak. Now we have Homeland Security. Would you like to step up?
Good morning. My name is Jennifer Harper. I'm the Director for New Hampshire Homeland Security and Emergency Management. And chatted with Representative Cordelli and Ladd on this when it was first introduced. We do support it. We did not support it in the way that it was written. Had the opportunity to work with Senator Prentice on some amendment language, which you have.
They don't have it yet.
They don't have it yet?
It's at OLS,
Okay.
but it'll be
Okay.
introduced.
All right, so we did make some changes so that it was more in compliance with emergency management standards. Added some language in about there were some types of disasters that weren't particularly outlined. He just mentioned cybersecurity, so that's one of them. Also, the schools that are in the emergency planning zone for Seabrook Nuclear Power Plant to make sure that their plans incorporate actions necessary for evacuation during a nuclear disaster, if there were to be one. Also suggesting to change the date that the plans are due to my office from September to October. And chatting with Amy and her staff over at DOE and my staff that work on the school program, we noticed a trend when we looked back on our records that not necessarily every school was in by September 1st, but it seemed to be that as the school year kind of got going, that they would group together, meet, talk about their plans, submit it. So we're suggesting an October 15th submittal date to give them some time to get into school, get things kind of organized, and chat with all interested parties that need to be involved in the plan. So I think those were the biggest highlights. So we do work very well with Amy and her team, and certainly would not want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to say, and just pretend that the schools are HSEM's responsibility when really they are the Department of Education's responsibility, and we're here to assist them to make all of us safer in our school systems.
Thank you very much. Any questions, comments from the committee members?
Just to let you know, even though the amendment is at OLS, I've just asked my assistant to bring over copies so that everybody can at least look at it before it comes back. Okay, so you have it as a reference point today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Director Harper. And I think that is it for people who have signed up. Do we have anybody in the audience who would like to speak to this bill? Seeing none, that ends the hearing on 11, House Bill 1125. Now, the next we're taking up is House Bill 1164. And the prime sponsor is Michael Moffett.
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's great to see everybody in person. And for the record, my name is Michael Moffett, Merrimack District 9, Loudon and Canterbury. And I'm actually a co-sponsor. Representative Howard Pearl is the prime sponsor. And he is a farmer, and he is actually working and at a meeting today. He's still very, very hardworking, busy farmer. So I'm going to just briefly explain the highlights of the bill, and the Commissioner of Agriculture is here in the House in the room, and he can speak in detail or take any questions on any piece of this measure. And again, the intent is to establish an agriculture in the classroom committee. So the classroom piece of it is why it's been in House education and now in Senate education. Section 2 describes a nonprofit corporation. Section 3 is a lengthy section involving the membership of this proposed committee, which was given a lot of thought and some adjustments before it got here. Section 4 talks about an exec board, and finally Section 5 talks about bylaws. So, all that said, that is the measure, 1164. Of course, I could try to answer questions, but and I will if there are any, but again, Commissioner Jasper is here, and he's a former Speaker of the House as well, as you know, and I'm sure he could speak in great detail to any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Saying none.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That was very easy.
Commissioner Jasper. Welcome, sir.
Good morning, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. I am Sean Jasper, Commissioner of the Department of Agriculture, Markets, and Food, and I do appear in support of the bill. Representative Pearl did put this bill in at my request. When I became commissioner, I shortly, as a member of the committee, which has existed for a number of years, and this is a program that exists in all 50 states, and they're set up in different ways in each of the states, so there's no standard. Some are, I understand, maybe under Farm Bureau and some under the Department of Agriculture directly, but we had an independent committee, and then at some point, the RSA was put in place. And the committee that existed then changed their bylaws to sort of mirror that change, but what it really did was create two parallel committees. The governor's office was never asked to fill any of the positions that appeared in statute, and the committee, while having the same members, you can't have an independent committee asking the governor or telling the governor to make appointments to their committee. So they made appointments in line with the statute, but they both existed. Now, where does that create a problem? Within the Department of Agriculture, there was a state appropriation to the committee. And what's been happening is you have this non-existent one that's in statute, and then this other one which isn't, and that's where the money has been going. Now, when the pandemic hit, that was when I was going to be working on making this, or trying to bring the two together, but obviously priorities changed, so I'm back at it this year. And the importance of them being a 501c3 is that under Farm Bureau membership dues, $1 of each of their dues goes to the committee. That doesn't create a problem, but they also have a checkoff, and there are other people or organizations who make donations, but they need to have that ability to write that off. So I worked with the Attorney General's office. They're the ones who actually came up with the language that you see here to bring the two together. The governor has made appointments to the committee at this point as it exists in statute, and so we're just trying to bring these together to one copacetic committee so that we can operate as the legislature, I believe, intended for it to operate, and not give up that ability for them to be a 501c3. There was a membership change in that one of the organizations no longer exists at all. Another organization exists, but really only on paper for certain legal requirements, and they're not interested in actually having anything to do with this. And then the two organizations we added are participating as other members as it is now, so we're just trying to bring everything into line. Hopefully, that clarifies what we're doing, and I would be glad to answer any questions if you have
Thank
any.
you. Questions? Senator Hennessy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Commissioner. A technical question for you, given your previous expertise in the legislature. My understanding that a committee is when there's legislative members, but a commission is when there's legislative members and additional members.
Commissions usually are something, any of those things are generally study committees or study commissions. So there are many cases where you have permanent committees.
Okay.
And I, trying to think off the top of my head, I wasn't prepared for that
I'm not
question.
here to challenge. I just want to make sure we have the
Yeah,
right
no,
word.
because this is not a short, this is a permanent,
Yep.
permanent committee. And, I think well, some are called boards, so I'm thinking,
Okay.
Milk Sanitation Board and Board of Trustees, but
Yeah.
there's no legal definition that I know of. But this is something that, as a national committee, is set up
Thank you.
this way.
Any other questions, comments? Senator Khan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think Senator Hennessy, you made a good point. Is this a commission or a committee? And I totally agree with her perspective, given my more limited legislative experience. Is there a state appropriation going to this committee now?
There is. Currently, it's at 15,000. So there are two different organizations that my department has had longstanding appropriations for. One is the FFA, which is the New Hampshire. It's a foundation. It's a totally private foundation. That gets the same appropriation as this committee, which the committee has been in statute for a number of years. So we're not talking about changing the name, because that's already been in statute for, well over a decade. I don't know,
2009.
2009. So that's been in there for a number of years. So there is that $15,000 appropriation, which was, fine going to the FFA Foundation, because that's been the way that's been. And why I didn't choose to just, try to move in that direction and have it totally separate, that's already existed in the FFA Foundation as a well-established organization, nationally again. I'm not a big fan of boards that are self-perpetuating, and since this was already in statute with gubernatorial appointments, I think that's a better way to go, because what happens, in my opinion, is when you have boards that appoint their own members, it just becomes very, incestuous in a way. And I think the idea of having an outside influence on something like this, which is getting into our schools and ag in the classroom, is a much better model. So that's why I chose to ask us to move in this direction, rather than to totally eliminate the reference of ag in the classroom from the statute.
Follow-up?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm getting curious about the program. Is the objective to move what otherwise would have been print materials to an online format? I guess I'm You know, this is not going to be a course in every school. That's
No,
just an
it's,
unrealistic
you know,
expectation.
we
But-
don't-
But what is the expectation of establishing some age-appropriate course-related or educational materials?
And that is what has been ongoing for well before 2009. So this doesn't change what is being done in the classroom. And there is outreach to all the schools, and so really it's a voluntary program. And so in many cases, we have different locations around the state that students can come to. So one of the ones that I went to, which was a great opportunity, was the Remick Museum, where the schools within a reasonable mileage, excuse me, I'm suffering from a little bit of a head cold, and so my thoughts aren't quite as clear as I'd like them to be. They come into the farm, or to the museum in this case, and they have different workstations and working horses, blacksmithing, any number of things can be shown about the farm, actual equipment, explain how the hay machines work, any number of things. They can also go into the classroom. There are books that we purchase to be distributed for the lower grades, talking about life on the farm type thing at an appropriate age level. So it is really educational, but it's voluntary. We have a part-time coordinator who does the outreach and organizes the field trips.
What's that?
Yeah, I just, the potential for more online access certainly seems a good direction to go as opposed to the field trip in any case.
And I don't think there's anything quite like the hands-on experience for those
Petting a
kids to
cow.
really see the live horse or cow or jeep, et cetera. But, that's not really what we're about here. This is just about a restructuring of the committee itself, not a restructuring of what the committee is designed to do.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none. Thank you very much.
Thank you very
Commissioner.
much.
Representative Hobson supports, doesn't want to speak. Anybody else in the audience who would like to speak on this particular bill? Seeing none, we'll end the public hearing on House Bill 1164. Thank you. Our next bill is House Bill 1367, relative to civics instruction in schools. And let me see who's going to introduce that one. Representative Hobson? Welcome.
Thank you very much. Just going to find my paperwork. Good morning, honorable colleagues. Thank you for the opportunity to bring this bill to the committee's attention. You'll recall that last year this committee passed HB 320, requiring a civics competency assessment for high school graduation. Oh, sure. Deb Hobson, representative for Rockingham 35 in Rockingham County. Good, okay. Schools are already working to implement that measure, and parents especially are excited about this new emphasis on common fundamentals. During last summer's review process, it was brought to our attention by the Department of Education that we could fine-tune the statute and improve it a bit with language to reaffirm the provision, allowing for accommodations for students on an individualized education program. However, when this bill was introduced, there was confusion between the reporting for locally developed assessments and the citizenship test. This measure simply requires the results of the citizenship test be reported and makes provisions for special education students.
Thank you. questions from the committee members? Seeing none, thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
I have, who wants to speak? Representative Moffett wants to speak.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. Again, Representative Michael Moffett, Merrimack 9, Canterbury and Loudon. I want to thank Representative Hobson for sponsoring this. Diana Fenton is still here. It called me in the very last day last fall for us to submit any LSRs for language improvements, and I was away from my office at that moment, and we were running out of time, so Representative Hobson did get the recommended language changes into OLS, and then, so this bill is Representative Hobson said, two very simple changes and improvements to HB 320, which is now statute, which asks that schools administer the U.S. immigration naturalization assessment to every student. And that requirement is now, as I believe we just mentioned, being implemented throughout the state, and we see this as improving confidence in the civics and history and government classes. So the two changes, again, you have in front of you, very simple. It clarifies the requirement that schools provide accommodations to special ed students or students with disabilities. So that becomes a little clearer, which is a nice improvement. And the other piece of it, very simply, you'll see is struck out, so there's no confusion. The locally developed competency assessments for civics do not need to be submitted to DOE. Only the results of the standard 120-question U.S. citizenship test. So two very small improvements in the language. And again, I appreciate Representative Hobson stepping up. And the recommendations from Ms. Fenton and DOE made a lot of sense. And there you have it. And I'd be happy to take any questions if there are any.
Questions, Senator Khan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Greetings, Representative. So we continue to have in this statute developed by the 2020 U.S. Citizens and Immigration Service. And if I go to the U.S. Naturalization website and I look at what tests they are doing this month or since 2021, of April 2021, it is the 2008 test. Are we doing something odd by not staying current with what the federal department is using as an active test?
Sure, Senator. Thank you for the question. Good question. Yes, there are two versions, or at least two versions, of the United States Naturalization and Immigration Assessment. The original one, which you referred to, or the earlier one from 2008, had 100 questions. And then sometime, I believe 2020, a slightly more rigorous version with 128 questions it was put into practice. And then with the new administration last year, they reverted back to the 2008 version. So there's two exams that are out there. So there would be no confusion. We specifically identified the 2020 version with 128 questions as opposed to the 2008 version with 100 questions. They're very similar. So there'd be no confusion. We specifically did identify the 128 question version, basically because there's just a little bit more meat to it. It's a little bit more rigorous, and the students would learn just a little bit more. So that's why we specifically identified that version of the assessment.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Well, if I
Representative
could,
Moffett.
Madam
Did you
Chair.
have another question, Senator Khan?
Yeah, a question and, just trying to get more insight. I get it. There's one that has more questions than the other. But there's one that's, I don't care. maybe I should care. It just seems that if the federal department is using a test from 2008 as its standard, and we're setting a different standard, is that what we want to do forever in our statute? Or should we just say whatever is the current U.S. Citizen and Immigration Service test? There is one current one.
Sure. Thank you again, Senator. Well, again, as I said before, just to be clear, so there's good, clear definition as to which assessment, without clarifying the specific assessment that we want to see used, then we could run into the situation where some schools would use one version and some schools would use another version. So by simply specifying which version we'd like to see used, we think that makes it clearer and provides, the definition that schools will know which assessment to give. And again, as I said before, they're very similar. And the 2020 version, as I said before, has a little bit more to it. And so by identifying that one or specifying that one as the desired instrument or the desired assessment, I think it's a little bit better because it's just a little bit more to it. So there you go.
I think I'm going to get the same answer if I ask a different question. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Representative Moffett.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I have Representative Donnelly and Representative Ladd support the bill, do not want to speak, and Representative Lucas supports, does not want to speak. Anybody else in the audience who would like to speak to this bill? Okay. Attorney Fenton, do you have anything to add to this? Do you want to add anything? Okay. Do you want to add anything for clarification? Turn it on.
Thank you. Mackenzie Snow, Division Director of Learner Support at the New Hampshire Department of Education, for the record. And also I have with me Nate Green, who is the Bureau Administrator who oversees this graduation requirement. I think the proposed changes have been well explained, clarifying existing.
Turn the mic down, sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing, thank you.
Thank you, appreciate the feedback. The proposed changes have been well explained, clarifying existing requirements on schools and school districts to provide accommodations for students with disabilities in accordance with their IEP and making modifications in accordance with their IEP. And then clarifying that the reporting requirement is specific to the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, which is a set exam that can be compared. When we had the requirement for the locally developed competency assessment, we did have issues with implementation and reporting, and of course, comparability of that assessment. So these are, as stated, requested technical assistance changes made by the Department of Education, and we're just here to respond to any questions.
Okay, Senator Khan, you have a question.
I may as well ask again. You've already heard the question, but would it be a more useful guidance to our schools to, rather than specify a specific test like the 2020 one, which was used for a narrow window of time, and the alternative that I mean, while this is in front of us, it just seems like a fairly easy opportunity to clean it up. And that's my words, probably not what Representative Moffett would say, but that we use the current U.S. Citizen and Immigration Service test.
Thank you for the question. Representative Moffett, I think, made clear the legislative intent to utilize a more rigorous version of that exam. The only piece of information I'd add from a technical assistance perspective is that we have seen this exam change multiple times, and thus it is unpredictable if we potentially utilize the current as selected by the U.S. federal government exam, unpredictable for schools to implement because that is possible, if not probable, to again change. So this does provide some clarity and consistency to specify a specific examination.
Follow up?
Nope.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, if I don't see anybody else here in the audience who likes to speak to this bill, we conclude the hearing on 1367. What time are we at? 9:49. The next bill is House Bill 1263. Prime sponsor. Representative Nurk. Representative Tanner? Oh, okay, fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, my name's Representative Linda Tanner. I represent Sullivan District 9, the towns of Plainfield, Cornish, Grantham, Springfield, Croydon, Newport, Sunapee, and Unity. The main sponsor of this bill is Representative Knirk, who most of you know is a retired physician. And he was very concerned about the lack of physical activity in public schools right now. And he and a few of his colleagues, one who wrote a book on actually the effect of exercise in school, presented it to us in the House. And I'm a co-sponsor. I taught physical education and health in the public schools, Kearsarge, for 35 years. So it's, right up my alley, so to speak. And I agree with him that the physical education, guided activities is very important for the development not only of physical ability, but also mental ability. And it's been very proven that particularly in the lower grades, physical activity and guided physical activity, which is in physical education classes, improve learning and are very key, particularly to the success in reading and math. So this bill, as it originally was presented to us in the House, and I had some concerns about it, actually prescribed a certain amount of time that had to be given to physical education classes in both the elementary grades and the higher grades. And I realized right off and spoke to Dr. Knirk, Representative Knirk about the fact that, it's not for us at this level to prescribe that in detail, the weeds of what actually goes on in the public schools. Physical education has been part of the curriculum and the standards for quite a while, although there's been some discussion this year and quite a bit of discussion about when those were proposed to be moved to integrated standards, but that's another bill. So we changed the bill. The bill was changed, amended, to take out those minutes of time that should be allotted to physical education and simply reinforces that, particularly because it's in 18910, which is under studies, it's not under standards, but reinforces in another part of the statutes how important physical education, wellness, and health are to the overall well-being of our students and to their learning. And so in the amendment, it stresses that, as you will see, and it also adds to it those areas that are included in the original RSA is like exercise, wellness, child abuse, drug and alcohol issues. And it's been amended to also include interpersonal relationships and sexual violence prevention. In addition, another amendment was added to this bill that it adds financial literacy or personal financial studies. And I totally agree with that as well. I think it's very important that kids learn about finance and about credit cards that they're using and how it can put them severely into debt. It's not just a piece of plastic. And also how to make a budget and how to, succeed financially. And sometimes that's completely overlooked. So I'm glad that this was an amendment that was added to the bill. So I guess that's my story for this bill, and I will take any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much. Questions? Senator Hennessy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Representative. So in looking at parts 1 and 2, I'm trying to figure out exactly what's changed from 18910. And correct me if I'm wrong, is it just the interpersonal relationships?
The interpersonal relationships and sexual violence, I believe, is also a change in that particular section. Did I put it in here? No, I didn't.
So those are the two things that have,
Yes, those are the two things that were added to the, physiology, hygiene, health, wellness, the effects of alcohol and drugs, kind of a laundry list. And again, this is in 189:10, which is under studies, which is quite different than under standards in the later RSAs. So it's kind of it's an RSA. It seems to be more to give emphasis to certain things rather than a prescription. So I'm not a lawyer, so that's just how I take it.
thank you.
Any other questions from the committee members? Senator Khan.
I just took the opportunity to take a look at 169C3. And in light of the question from our colleague, and the definition of child abuse as defined there does include sexual violence as well. So I think you've probably made a good clarification
Right,
here to tie it back.
right.
That was the
Yes,
intent.
that's correct. I would agree with that.
Thank you.
Do you have a follow-up?
No.
Oh, okay, thank you. Any other questions, comments? Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Representative Ladd wants to speak.
Good morning again, Madam Chairman and members of the Senate Education Committee. For the record, my name is Rick Ladd. I chair House Education. I'm also from Haverhill, New Hampshire. To respond, I think Representative Tanner went through the bill very well. But I will note that in Section 2 that you had referenced to, there are some changes there which I feel are very relevant and needed in our statutory language, and echo what we have put into the content of an adequate education under HB 1671, where we now have issues like the Holocaust embedded. In Part 2 here, we have physical education, but to include exercise. Exercise was not there prior to, and exercise is a key aspect of education. As a fourth grade teacher, I used to run the kids around the soccer field every day before we got into the classroom and started working out with our academics, and it worked. The next part on a line 10 of that, also on line 9, the importance of exercise and wellness. Wellness echoes what has been in ED 306, the minimum standards for public school approval, for at least 10 years. But there's been no mention of wellness in our statutory language at all. And that's a very important component of what we're doing within our schools. On line 10, we included health and interpersonal relationships. Interpersonal relationships, how kids react to each other socially, emotionally, physically, and academically, is very important to be taught within every school and every classroom, and I feel that that really strengthens this bill. And again, on line 10, you'll see from line 10 and 11 there, physical education and wellness again. And at the end of line 11, prevention of sexual violence was added into this, which is very important in today's life and society. When we're looking at part 3, we injected personal finance literacy instruction, and this has come at us over and over and over in education from the New Hampshire Bankers Association, from the BIA, the Chamber of Commerce for the state. They all recognize this. This is an aspect of instruction and curriculum that needs to be emphasized in our schools. If I look at the ED 306 rules, those are the rules for minimum standards for a public school approval. In section 306-3, there is a table, and this table requires credits for graduation and graduation competencies. Under economics, it says including personal finance, half credit. We've never had any reference to personal finance in statute, and this is embedding it under studies under 189, as well as having it now embedded if 1671 cruises through, where we've added into the content of an adequate education, which is very important. You also see in those minimum standards for public school approval the issue of health education. That's 1/2 credit required for graduation. And physical education, you're required to have 1 full credit for graduation. So what we're doing here with studies, we're reinforcing what we have in statute, or in rules. I know that rules are not supposed to wag the dog, but we should have reference to what we have in rules in statutory language. And so lastly, this, I believe, really supports where we're going with what is a content of an adequate education. The personal finance literacy can be taught through economics, as we're currently doing. It can be embedded into some other course, K through 12, and it should be K through 12. You don't wait just to high school to be teaching personal finance literacy. It can very well be done in grades 3 and 4, and even lower. When you go to the store, you know, how many kids will say, I want that, I want this, I want this, you know, and not recognize what is in mom or dad's pocketbook. In conclusion, I very much support this bill. It's needed, and it will support 1671, which is on the train towards statutory language right now. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Questions from the committee members?
Thank you.
I don't see one. You're lucky.
Have a good day.
Thank you. Pamela Keilig? Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Pamela Keilig, and I am the Public Policy Specialist at the New Hampshire Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. The coalition is the umbrella organization for our 12 community-based crisis centers that each year provide free and confidential services to nearly 15,000 victims of domestic and sexual violence. I'm speaking today in support of HB 1263. This is important legislation, as you've heard so far this morning, that incorporates interpersonal relationships and also sexual violence prevention into the health curriculum in public schools. We're really grateful to the legislature for bringing forward this important initiative and feel that this could have a huge impact on interrupting and ending the cycle of violence in New Hampshire. We know that violence prevention education has an immediate effect on the youth and families that participate in these important programs and their ability to get the support that they need and intervene after abuse has occurred. Because this education, students learn healthy relationships and how to identify unhealthy behaviors and grooming tactics, all important skills that will have long-lasting impacts on their development as they mature into young adults. Crisis centers provide free, age-appropriate prevention programming already in the state. And this, over the last 3 years, I just wanted to highlight that this programming was able to reach 80,000 adults and youth across 5,000 presentations. So there's already a precedent set to incorporate this into schools and communities. But this legislation could ensure that it has a much far-reaching impact in making sure that all students in public schools have access to this education. And I think another thing that is just really important to highlight is that this can actually help mitigate the extreme economic and social costs of trauma that is associated with sexual violence. Not providing education to prevent sexual violence can be devastating and be extremely costly. And we know that on average in the United States, the cost of trauma of sexual assault is actually $120,000 per victim. So there's a long stretch of impact if we're not preventing this from the get-go. And so by supporting education and empowering survivors and their children, we are investing in safer communities and promoting healthy relationships that form the backbone of our society. And then the final piece I just wanted to highlight is we're also very supportive of the financial literacy component of this bill because nearly 99% of domestic and sexual violence victims experience financial abuse. And this is a tactic that really limits a survivor's ability to leave an abusive relationship, access housing, build wealth, and even maintain their employment. So we feel that this is a really fitting component to complement sexual violence prevention and really ensure that all Granite Staters have the financial literacy skills they need to live independent lives. So thank you so much for your time this morning, and I'd be happy to take any questions, and I really hope you consider supporting this important legislation.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions from the committee members?
No, thank you so much.
Seeing none, thank you. Representative Amanda Toll.
Good morning. My name is Rep. Amanda Elizabeth Toll, and I represent the City of Keene at large. I'm here to testify in support of HB 1263, which was amended by the House to fold in a provision to include education on sexual violence prevention and interpersonal relationships in the health curriculum in public schools. This provision was incorporated from HB 1533, which I had introduced as separate legislation to help improve our school's curriculum around this issue. I am very grateful to the House Education Committee for their unanimous support for this initiative. Today, I'll be speaking to that component. This legislation helps keep our youngest Granite Staters safe by giving them the tools they need to establish and respect others' boundaries, build healthy relationships, and to protect themselves from abuse. Education related to preventing sexual violence and healthy relationships can help stem the tide of domestic and sexual violence. The psychological and physical impact of non-consensual sexual activities can last a lifetime, and it is wonderful to have bipartisan support for wanting to prevent harm of this manner. As it currently stands, in Statute 18910, the state of New Hampshire does and can dictate what topics are taught in schools. From health and physical education to sexual well-being topics, the precedent for preventing harm and promoting well-being through education is clearly established. This legislation has been endorsed by the New Hampshire Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence, a highly trusted organization. This legislative proposal is also endorsed by the New Hampshire Youth Movement and End Sexual Violence on Campus New Hampshire. These two youth-led groups represent populations who are deeply impacted by the lack of education related to consent and sexual violence prevention. According to empirical data, 20% of women in the U.S. report being sexual assault survivors. Furthermore, there appears to be something amiss societally and systematically when 25% of men admit to having caused non-consensual sexual harm. As we heard today from the coalition, these concerns around harm are particularly present for children, adolescents, and young adults. Government has a moral imperative to address very real social issues that impact nearly every citizen when we consider both sides of the trauma cycle. This is not a radical idea. We already teach our students about physical education, hygiene, and the impact of alcohol and drugs. We clearly share a vision of wanting to keep young people safe and healthy. Teaching sexual violence prevention is something that is already normalized in many other states. In fact, 9 states, including Maine and Vermont, already require consent education as a standard component of sexual violence educational programming to be taught as part of public school curriculum. Co-sponsors of the initial legislation included 2 retired public school teachers, a liaison for the Haven Crisis Center, a psychologist, a social worker, and 2 state representatives who are sexual assault survivors themselves and have been open with their stories. A tremendous amount of thought was put into this bill. I hope that you will pass 1263 with this common sense provision adding sexual violence prevention to our state curriculum. This is an essential public safety measure and will undoubtedly advance our shared interest of protecting children and our young adult Granite Staters. Thank you so much for hearing my testimony.
Thank you. Any questions, comments from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you very much, Representative Toll.
Thank you very much.
Let's see here. Megan Tuttle supports, doesn't want to speak. Representative Hobson supports, doesn't want to speak. Representative Lekas supports, doesn't want to speak. And that's what I have here. Do we have any other people in the audience that like to speak to this bill? Is that an addition? Oh, okay. If not, this concludes the hearing on House Bill 1263.
A lot of people in the hall that are coming in for 1663, so you don't need to be here for 1663. That would be fantastic.
Just so you know, I had Pam, who came in and distributed that Representative Lang's testimony. I'm assuming for this bill. For this bill.
We've got a few people that are out.
This is for the last one. No, I meant this was for the last. Oh, okay. I want to put it in the right folder. Sorry.
Yes.
Ms. Fenton?
Nothing like bringing your kids to get immediate empathy.
No, no standing. Grab a chair.
Hi, good to see you. Yes. But you're signed in, right?
Welcome, everybody. We are taking up House Bill 1663, and there are many of you who would like to speak. So, after introduction of the bill, I'm asking for, keep your testimony down to 3, not more than 4 minutes, because we like to hear from as many as possible. So with that, we'll introduce the sponsor of the bill. Erica Leon?
Yes, it is. Thank you, Chairman Ward and members of the Education Committee. Today I present House Bill 1663, a bill I introduced in order to take the lessons learned over the last 10 years in order to clarify the protocols, points of confusion, so that the parents can focus on educating their children in the way that suits them best, as opposed to trying to figure out how to comply with all the different rules and the laws and to cross-reference them and to figure out what they're supposed to do to be compliant. So I'll start with some background because none of us were here back in 2010, 2012, when there were a lot of changes happening with home education. In 2010, we still had in place a much more complex and proscriptive homeschooling law. And at the time, there were some very restrictive laws that came through, but the legislature shot down. After that, they tried to use the rulemaking process to bring in what had been turned down by the legislature, but bring it through the back door with administrative rules. In 2012, there were some good changes to homeschooling that clarified it and made very clear what was necessary, what was important, and how to follow the procedures. So this actually made it a lot easier for parents to understand what was going on, a lot easier to clarify how to comply with the law, and just to focus on making sure that their children can succeed, both in life and in their classroom at home. So I won't claim to know all of the stories at the time, but there were a lot of reasons why they brought this back and made it so that this is a lot more clear. Things have been going really well, especially with families who spend months and months trying to figure out how to do this and how to do it right, not just in what choices to make, but in how to follow the law. But our COVID crisis homeschoolers really showed how confusing and complex it is. Right now, it's a question of who do you notify? What happens if you move? So the bill, as passed on consent by the House, clarifies a lot of those issues. It takes it so that the school districts that don't have a policy for home education will need one. There's about 6, and there's great policies in place. There are also, it also clarifies this longstanding myth about how much of the time the parent needs to direct the education. So this way you can provide for it by your child learning how to learn and how to find experts. So this way we have the language that protects it. And then one of the other important issues, too, is rulemaking. That's something that was sort of left on the table in the House so that they could focus on this core refinement to make these laws more clear. If we can get rid of the rulemaking authority and put any nuggets that may be necessary that are there in rules into the statutes now, that would be a very good way to make it easier for families to comply and make it easier for families to get past what they need to do to be legal and focus on how to thrive. Right now, there's 4 pages of law, 6 pages of rules. It's not going to be a huge job, but I would love to be able to help you in any process going forward, because I know it could be a heavy lift. But I believe that at minimum, we should be able to get this bill as it went on consent through the Senate and get it to the governor. And hopefully, we can also just take some of that burden off the department, that burden off of the parents trying to interpret rules, and just make it so that we can continue to have a flourishing, unfunded homeschooling community here in New Hampshire. And with that, I'm willing to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Questions from the committee members? Seeing none.
Thank you very much.
Michael Connolly.
Good morning, Senators. My name is Mike Donnelly. I am a senior counsel with the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. I grew up in New Hampshire, actually. I grew up in Grafton, graduated from Mascoma High School. I still own a house up in Enfield. I was up there the other day working on it. It's a 230-year-old farmhouse built by a Revolutionary War soldier, John Story. So my connection to New Hampshire remains strong. We come up here every year for vacation and love the state, continue to love coming up here and meeting you folks and the homeschool community here. We represent probably close to 1,000 families in the state and speak for many others who support this bill. As Representative Leon said, this is a very helpful bill, a lot of good clarifying language in the bill. You'll see there's just a few changes to the words, a couple of words added. I do want to just note that homeschooling has become a much larger community over the last 2 years. A lot of people have jumped in, and so these clarifications, I think, will be very helpful. The U.S. Census Bureau reports that homeschooling doubled. I imagine it probably doubled in the Granite State as well. So we support all the little changes. I do want to also just comment on the rules issue. We do support removing the rulemaking authority from the Commissioner of Education. The rules are not necessary, and honestly, there really isn't. I don't ever think the rules were necessary, but at a time when the law was more complicated, I can understand why they were helpful. But they have become a place where homeschoolers have to consult two bodies of law, and that's not necessary. The law is clear. RSA 193 is very clear on what homeschoolers need to do, and they don't need to have to then go over and look and see how the Department of Education wants to word this differently or that differently. So we would support that, and it's not a heavy lift. They're just not necessary. So if you can do that, that would be something we would support. At any rate, I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. Thank you so much for your service to the state.
Thank you very much. Questions from the committee members? Seeing
Thank you.
none,
Thank you, Senator. Thank you.
Madam Chair.
We have a question?
Sorry.
Senator Carr.
Michael?
Yes, Senator.
Thanks for your giving us the written testimony in addition. I'm wondering about the rules. I did not consult what the department has as rules. Do you?
Ed 315 is the rules, and they're easy to find online. And as Representative Leon testified, there's 6 pages. I mean, it's essentially a restatement of the law with a few tweaks, which in my opinion, as an attorney, and I have been doing New Hampshire homeschool law for 15 years. I am a New Hampshire attorney. Actually, I've been doing New Hampshire homeschool law for almost 20 years. I'm a New Hampshire attorney. I've been in 3 other jurisdictions. I've reviewed them, and in my opinion, the rules as written today simply restate the law. It's my understanding the commissioner is in support of this too. He's like, yeah, the rules are in compliance with the law, but he can speak for himself.
So what is it? Yeah, thank you. So what is there in here that says that the department wouldn't have rules on homeschooling?
It's not. I'm just saying that would be something that, it was in the House version, and it came over without it, and so we would support if it were to be put back in. We think that would be a helpful addition to this legislation, if you put that back in. But we support the bill as it is also. I'm just saying that it's not in the bill before you.
I know.
It's not in the bill before you. I'm merely observing that it was in the House version. It's not in this version, and that we would support you putting that language back in as Representative Leon had suggested.
Yeah. Thanks for the clarification.
I'm not sure I clarified anything, but
Well,
you look a little
I think
confused.
what's important is that we recognize, if we went, I would rely on the department to give us the many instances in which we have rules that, and statutes in both places on the same topic. So I think that's probably a good thing, because different people consult these different sources for different reasons. So I'm glad that you clarified that it's not a part of this bill. We don't need to worry about sorting out who's using which source for what reasons. I appreciate.
May I comment? Sure. Thank you. So in all 50 states, there are about 4 other states that have laws and rules. So that just gives you a little bit of insight into how other states are handling that issue. So certainly in some areas, I can understand a law being more complicated and needing some interpretive assistance. In this case, that's not the case for homeschoolers. So if you can make it simpler for the homeschool community, I think that would be appreciated. Thank you, Senator.
I guess I don't need, we can continue that debate. Again, I think there are different purposes for, and thank you for
All
your
set,
testimony.
Senator Carr?
I am all set.
Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Senators.
Angel Bresson.
Good morning.
Welcome.
Thank you for your time today. Please enter the following testimony and support for HB 1663 into the record for me.
Would you state your name and?
Yep, my name is Angel Brisson, and my husband and I home educate our daughter. These are a few reasons that we support HB 1663. Firstly, regarding Part 2-1 of HB 1663, the participating agency serves only to acknowledge the letter of intent to home educate and to retain the letter on behalf of the family. Home education itself was designed to be directed by the parents, and it is solely our right and responsibility to guide our child's home education program. As it was never intended that a home education plan must be agreed on by both the parents and the participating agency, Part 2-1 of HB 1663 amends RSA 193 accordingly. So again, there's never was intent for us to have to consult with or get approval from the participating agency. That's not their role. The next part, Part 3-3 of HB 1663, if our family ever moves to another district and we have to terminate our home education program within our district, we just want that clarified, that we don't actually need to notify all the participating agencies. It's only one participating agency. So that part amends RSA 193 as well. And lastly, but definitely not least, pertaining to Part 5-2 of HB 1663, as home educators, we simply seek parity when it comes to academic achievement standards. Currently, home educated students who receive zero taxpayer funds, completely unfunded homeschoolers, are the only students for whom arbitrary academic achievement requirements are defined. The current home education statute reads that a student must score at or above the 40th percentile to show reasonable academic proficiency. In stark contrast, there are no such requirements for students who are in any of the other 4 educational tracks. That means public schools, both local and charter, private schools, pods, and EFA at-home students, all of which receive taxpayer funds in one form or another. For public schools, the mandated statewide assessment does not have any academic requirements for students or schools, and students may opt out of testing. Private schools have their own testing and evaluation criteria, which are not mandated by the state. Pod students may opt out of statewide assessments. And EFA participants must submit annual assessments but have no academic performance requirements. That's simply inequitable. It makes no sense for this 40th percentile requirement to exist for home educated students when no other child on any other educational track has academic achievement standards defined in a statute. Because HB 1663 seeks to correct these critical fallacies in the current home education statute, we ask that you please vote OTP for this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee members? Senator Khan, you have your light on. Do you have a question?
Somewhere along the way, I'd like to understand the effective date and whether, but maybe the department, I want to understand the effective date and whether it ought to be 90 days after passage or after the next school year. I just.
Okay. Any
I
other
don't
questions?
know if you've got any opinion on that, but sorry that my light is on.
No, that's okay.
Seeing no questions from the committee members, thank you very
Right,
much.
thank you.
Abigail Belmove.
I sent an email last night. I am Abigail Belmore from Chester, and I am a homeschooler, and I am a representative statewide and locally, and I mentor a ton of homeschoolers or potential homeschoolers. As a representative of homeschooling community, I am in support of this because it will clarify the laws and make it easier and more precise when explaining them to potential and future homeschoolers. Stating that public school systems need an equal access policy removes confusion for those that are looking for alternative or continued or additional education to benefit their children. There is none right now on quite a few schools.
They don't have it either stated on their websites or even in a booklet or whatnot for the student handbooks. So if we wanted to use, like, say, music or a science program or an art program, it's not even stated in quite a few of the schools that they will offer this, or they don't at all because it's not in their policy. All we're looking to do is to use our taxpayer money, which still goes to our local districts, to do an enrichment program. It's not asking for math, science, or reading, other than the science labs. But those sometimes are not offered in some of the public school systems. Stating that homeschooler children and parents need to be held at a higher standard than regular public school system needs to be gone, because whether the child has a learning disability or not, homeschooling is its own way of meeting those needs for those children, because we get to make that circle learn as a circle, not shove a circle into a square peg, because it's its own curriculum. We get to build our curriculum around our children, not trying to fit every child to fit one curriculum. So it removes a lot of that extra confusion that children get in public school systems. Returning students for public school system need not be discriminated because they were homeschooled either long-term, short-term, which we had a lot of that this last couple of years, need to be able to enter at their own grade and appropriate age level of which they are learning. Sometimes public school students are all on par on one level, but homeschoolers are all over the place. We might have a lower end or a higher end in certain subjects, but we would like to be treated fairly as our public peers. Notifications at the beginning or the end of a homeschool career needs to be less confusion, because we don't know where to send sometimes, or I get phone calls or emails asking why or where I need to send my letter of notification. I'm ending my program. Where do I send it? How do I do this? There's a lot of confusion in the law. And when we try to explain it, they're like, well, this is not what this is saying. Well, we're telling you what it says in layman's terms. Simple and precise legal wordage would help clarify for those of us that are trying to mentor or advise or be there for these new homeschoolers or these returning homeschoolers, or even people moving from out of state that are still homeschoolers but are moving into ours to be homeschoolers also. Thank you. Any questions?
Questions from the committee members? I see Senator Khan.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for your testimony. And I'm just curious, we've got these multiple forms of evaluation that are.
Yes.
And it sounds like you've got some experience. So I'm curious, which of these forms of evaluation are
For
you
evaluation, I use a testing called CAT, and it's the California Assessment Testing. There's several forms of this type. And I end up sitting my children down. My daughter, who is 11, who is reading very well, she does the test on her own. I leave her there. If she has a question, I'll come in and ask her, but I do not take the test for her. My son, who is going to be taking his first test this year, is not a complete whole-on reader, so I will have to sit with him and read the stuff, and he'll answer the questions. And as any person, you'll have to sit there and let them answer the question as they deem necessary. There is also another way of evaluating. We can have an evaluator, which is an educator that is, approved by the state. They can evaluate the student's portfolio, which we all maintain regardless if we test or if we don't. So when you evaluate a child, you're evaluating whether or not they're succeeding at a 40 percentile from last year, is how I explain it to parents, is that their child needs to progressively increase in education. So if they're still at their 6 months, 8 months, however they run their school system, if they're still reading at that level or they're still doing that at that level, obviously there's something in that curriculum that is not working, so that we use it as a tool, like any teacher would, that maybe something's not working. Maybe we need to figure out what is a better curriculum, what is a better form, what is something else we can use to make our evaluations better or make our children learn better. Maybe there's a learning issue that we're not aware of, and we can get testing outside of the facilities of public school system, because we don't generally use those. So we end up using our private insurance, which is even more difficult to use sometimes because those places are usually booked 6 months out. So when we use evaluations, we're trying to just make sure our children are continuously learning. We don't really, honestly, I don't care that it's 40%. As long as my child is ready to enter the next grade level, I don't care. I'm going to be honest. So when my daughter took her test last year, I noticed that she was right on par. Everything was 4.9 or 5.2, And I'm like, okay, she's ready to enter the 5th grade level of education because that's where everything kind of lined up. If she had lined up more at the 3rd grade level, I'd been like, okay, something's not working. What was wrong? Where was the problem at? And I would have reevaluated, researched, gone down a huge rabbit hole of curriculum and decided to fix that, which I have done in the past, which was an English program. It was awful. 5 programs in 1 year and found one that worked, and her scores improved. So we get to custom.
No,
Yeah.
thanks for
You're welcome. Anything else?
answering that.
Follow up.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Sounds
you.
like you have a pretty full workload there. Michelle Lavelle.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Michelle Lavelle, and I am the director and a co-founder of Granite State Home Educators. GSHE is an all-volunteer 501c4 nonprofit. We have approximately 6,000 members around the state, 9 different social media accounts with over 14,000 families. So we serve a massive section of the homeschool community here. And GSHE supports 1663 as presented from the House. I believe it addresses important aspects of the home education statute in that it resolves some inconsistencies and gives parity to homeschoolers relative to students and other educational pathways. This bill is about unfunded families. These are families that do not receive any kind of taxpayer support. So I want to make sure that that is absolutely clear because I know that can be very confusing with all these different options that are available right now. I do have written testimony that I'll distribute. I will also follow up with an email because I hyperlink a ton of things for you if you want to take a deeper dive. So I'll have that for you, but for sake of time, I'll abbreviate my remarks right now to just the academic requirement. It is in the Section 5, where it removes the unequitable academic achievement threshold of that 40th percentile. Currently, unfunded homeschoolers are the only educational pathway in the state that has individual student achievement requirements written into state law. The current home education statute says child must show, quote, progress commensurate with age and ability. And it further states that if the family uses a standardized test for their annual assessment, that the child must achieve a composite score at or above the 40th percentile to demonstrate sufficient academic proficiency. Achievement at or above that 40th percentile means that 39% of students fail automatically. This standard is unique to unfunded home-educated students. By comparison, Prenda Pod students who are enrolled in the Recovering Bright Futures program and funded with a $6 million federal grant may opt out of statewide testing, like their public school peers, and have no academic performance requirement. The Education Freedom Account students have no education performance requirement, yet receive approximately $4,500 of state funds. The town tuitioning program is another program that has no academic achievement requirement in statute, and in those cases, the local tax dollars follow the child to an out-of-district or private school. Students in public schools have an average cost of $18,000 per pupil, yet don't have an individual academic achievement requirement expected of them. So just like other states, New Hampshire's public schools have struggled with learning loss during the pandemic. However, the statewide achievement scores have generally been below proficiency long before COVID was even an issue. According to state statute RSA 193-H:2, public school districts were required to have, quote, all pupils at the proficient level or above on the statewide assessments as of the 2018-19 school year. And in my written testimony, you'll see that benchmark has not been met. If homeschoolers had done that, we would have been deemed failing. In addition, public school students may opt out of their statewide assessments, and that's in RSA 193-C:6. By comparison, homeschooled students must do an annual assessment every year and cannot opt out. So you can see this is very unequitable. the academic requirement for standardized tests on the 40th percentile or above is unique to home-educated students, even though we receive no federal, no state, and no local dollars. So the proposed change in this bill, in HB 1663, does not remove the annual assessment requirement. Home-educated students must still administer some type of assessment, so that remains the same. And they have that, that's still there. So in closing, please support this bill as written. GSHE also does support if we pursue DOE rulemaking authority, and we'd be happy to work with the representatives and the Senate to help make that happen if that wishes to be explored. But we do support the bill as written. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Senator Hennessy.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your testimony. I appreciate it. I just want to clarify one comment you made about support, tax dollar support for homeschoolers. Section 1 of the bill does have a cost to it. While I agree with it that homeschoolers should be able to participate in co-curricular and other activities such as band, there is a cost to that, so I just want to point that out to you.
Families already pay those tax dollars to their local public schools, whether they have a child enrolled or not, or whether they even have a child. Those dollars stay in the district. And there's another statute, I believe it's 198:38, that reimburses the high school out of the state adequacy funds should a student take curricular programs. So those funds go back to the high school if a student participates.
Just follow up. And because I'm not familiar with that one, can you tell me if it reimburses for co-curricular as well?
It doesn't, it's ambiguous. So it's referred to as a percentage of a student. I believe it's 1/5 of a student. But that would get down to the district level, but it's 198:38.
Maybe we can ask the department.
It's in written testimony and hyperlinked, which I'll send you in my email.
Thank you.
You have a follow-up? All set? Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anybody else in the audience who would like to speak? Anne Marie Banfield, welcome.
Actually, what I'm going to do in the interest of time is send you my written testimony. I just wanted to let you know that I do support this bill, but I know that you're running behind on some of your bills, so what I'm going to do is just email it to you and just let you know that I do support this bill.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Thank you very
Thanks.
much. Anybody else? Okay, I see Senator Kevin Abart supports the bill but doesn't want to speak. Representatives Donnelly, Ladd, Hobson, Likas, support but do not want to speak. Senator Bob Clegg, supports, doesn't want to speak. John Hadley, supports, doesn't want to speak. Sarah Chamberlain, supports, doesn't want to speak. And Tony Likas supports but doesn't want to speak. So if there's nobody else who have anything to add to this bill, we'll close the public hearing on this bill. Thank you very much. Keep looking at the clock.
Yeah, they just changed the battery, it must have been a bad battery. Remember, it was broken before.
Good morning, House Education Committee. For the record, my name is Representative Tony LaBranch, and I represent the town of Amherst. I'm here to introduce House Bill 1381. It's a very small change in the RSA. So I'll first start by explaining what a student school board member is. Student school board members are non-voting members of school boards. They simply share the viewpoint of the student body, which is a very important viewpoint, obviously, as they are the ones we are educating. So a lot of these issues arose when I was in high school. Sauhegan High School is one of the many school districts that does have a student school board member. And the reason the perspective of a student is so important is that we see a lot of things that the adults might not. When I was at Sauhegan, it was at the beginning of the vaping epidemic, which had not gone detected by the administration at that point. Another issue that Sauhegan was facing is that in some classrooms we did not have heating or cooling. There were holes in the ceilings, and when it rained, it would leak. I've had classes canceled when I was a high schooler because of those issues, and that is why I believe that a student perspective on school boards is important, because when I was a student and I would go to school board meetings, those issues would often go unaddressed. And it seems that if we actually had a student there at every single board meeting, we could maybe shine light on those issues. And now on to what the bill actually does. It does three things. First of all, it removes the cap that we currently have in the law that says you can only have one student school board member per board. And that is an issue for cities like Nashua and Manchester that have more than one high school. That means that currently some schools are not being represented at the school board because they have to rotate annually. I think it's important that we know what happens in every school, because every school has a different culture and a different day-to-day issues. The second thing that this bill does is that it standardizes it across the state. The current law is enabling legislation. This would make it so that it is a requirement for any school board with a high school in it. It defines that it can only be, obviously, a public high school that is part of the district. And lastly, it fixes what I believe was an oversight in the original drafting of the RSA, which states that seniors are not allowed to vote for student representatives, which I thought was very odd, as seniors, having been in a high school for 4 years, know exactly what the issues are facing their high school. So it did make sense that there was no ability for a senior to run for a student representative, as they would, graduate before the end of their term, but it did not make sense to me that the RSA would say that they're not eligible to vote. So it just simply strikes that provision from the statute. So I would be happy to take any questions.
Senator Hennessy.
Thank you, Representative, and thank you, Madam Chair. I have one question. I have schools in my district that are made up from several different towns. Did you consider adding a student representative from each town? I noticed you addressed the multiple schools within one town, but not the multiple towns within one school issue.
Thank you for the question. I hadn't actually considered that, but I think that would be a really great idea, because I know Sauhegan High School is made up of Mount Vernon and Amherst, and those have very different perspectives to bring to the table. But I would be happy to see that either way. But I think what Sauheganite lives day to day is pretty much the same in what we deal with at the school.
Senator Shorty.
Good morning, and thank you for your testimony. And I do see that input from students is valuable. I would like to think that whether you were a sitting board member or not, that you would be able to share your experiences and have input. My concern is making it into law where it takes away the choice and the local control, because I'm more of a person who likes local control, and I would like to talk to some of my school board superintendents in my district, see how they feel about it, and I just think that local control is really important. I wish the bill was more, may, not shall, and have the opportunity to decide if that's best for that particular school?
Thank you for the question. In talking with the New Hampshire School Board Association, they also stated what you just stated about local control. What they brought to me was that most school districts have already opted into the current legislation, so not much would change in that aspect. And it is more standardizing the process throughout the state so that every school is represented at the school board. There's only a handful of towns that I know of that would not have a student representative already.
Thank you.
Senator Khan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this is bringing me back to those activist days back many years ago. The effective date of this, should this be effective for the next school year so that, I mean, this isn't going to get signed until, legislature's out of session. Students aren't going to be present to have this election is my point. So would this be something to make effective January 1st of 23 or something like that?
I would agree with that in looking at the legislation. Yes, it probably should take effect on January 1st.
And if I may, Madam Chair?
Follow up.
So you raised, thanks for bringing our attention to point 3 on line 18 and the deletion there. I think that what somebody in the past must have anticipated is that these terms of representation probably coincide with a school year from September or something like that till following August, and that the election is probably something that takes place in the previous May. So they were probably anticipating that seniors would be voting for a student to represent a school year in which they're not in the school. So there's some logic to what the original wording or the current wording in the statute has. And I guess I'm looking for, in light of that, do you still feel that seniors ought to be, and I heard your point, they are more familiar with the school having attended for 4 years, but they have little interest, I mean, in who it is that would be representing the school in the following year. It's kind of, anyway, so there's some logic to maintaining what is in current statute relative to that. It seems to me.
Thank you for the question. To that, I would say that it does not specify when the election should take place. I know some school districts actually have the election in the fall, and it would be from that September to the next September. So typically a junior would fill that role. So I would leave it to the local school districts to determine when they would like to have that election, because in that case, those seniors would be representative for the entire year as well.
If I can follow, Madam Chair.
Follow up.
When do you, I mean, I would think that a school would have this election at the time that they're having their student government elections. You're suggesting that's not what occurs?
Thank you for the question. In my school district of Sahukin Cooperative School District, the election is in the spring, but I do know of other districts that have the election in the fall, and it's a school-wide election because you want the freshmen to be involved in the process as well, and the freshmen are not involved in the process in the spring at Sahukin currently in selecting who represents them at the school board, as the freshmen would be 8th graders at the time.
Thank you.
So I have a question. So you have the election possibly in the fall, and this representative is selected by the student body? And is it possible that one student could get elected more than once?
Thank you for the question. That is definitely a possibility. Just as representatives and senators can get elected for multiple terms, that is a possibility for student representatives as well.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Becky Wilson?
Good morning. Nice to see everyone. Thank you for taking my testimony. For the record, Becky Wilson, Director of Governmental Relations for the New Hampshire School Boards Association. And prior to that, district and high school administrator for a good part of my public school career before taking this position. So we did work quite closely with Representative LaBranche, and I'd like to thank him for bringing this very important topic forward about student voice and making sure that we're ensuring that student voice is part of our school board policy-making decisions. Each year at our delegate assembly, we talk about crucial, important topics that come up that are important across the state, and we did have a very large group of our membership who actually have put forth a mission to develop a scholarship specifically for school board representation members, so people that have served on their local school board as student reps. This year we'll be giving out 5 scholarships for that particular role. So this is a very important piece that, to Representative LaBranche's earlier comment, most school boards already across the state do have some form of student representation on their school board. There's a significant value when students serve in this capacity. It certainly increases student civic engagement, and it's a much-needed avenue to make sure that school boards are getting student perspectives across their district as a whole. Many schools, as we all know, each school has their own culture and their own climate and their own personality to some extent. For some of our districts that have schools, that can mean the perspective of somebody in one school as a student may be different than that of somebody at a different school in the district. So we certainly want to recognize that there is an individuality to each school across the school district. And I think to someone's earlier point on the committee, I think Senator Hennessy, perhaps different towns as well, may have different perspectives in terms of what students' experiences are like at one regional high school. So we would certainly be open to hearing that kind of language or support some changes to that. In the earlier House Ed hearing on this bill, some of the topics that did come up, certainly some adjustment in terms of how the students are chosen. Currently, there are some school districts that hold an election. It typically is in the fall, in my experience personally, because to Representative LaBranche's point, the student body is holding lots of elections in the fall. Student body president, vice president, class presidents, all of those things happen typically in the fall. So this could be one of those kinds of elections that could happen around that same time. But there are many school districts who currently have a school board member, non-voting school board member, student that is not an elected member. Sometimes they are appointed by administration. Sometimes they are selected on a rotating basis. So you may have a student rep at each meeting, but it may be a different student rep at each meeting, depending on what the school district's current practices are around that. Or if there's a particular issue that's coming before the school board, there are times where students and staff may choose to have a certain representative represent sort of the student voice around those particular issues. So there are lots of ways in which student representatives are currently chosen for the school board position. And we want to be sensitive to that. We certainly do value local control, and making sure that student voice is an aspect of policymaking in your district is very important to us, but we certainly want to also maintain district's ability to decide what is the best way for them to have that student voice on their board. So we would certainly be open to working with Representative LaBranche around how those positions are filled for each particular board, if that helped with some of the concerns that have been brought up earlier. And we certainly would support the date being in January of 2023 if that gave people time to sort of think about how they want to do that. It was very interesting when this came to our table and we were working with Representative LaBranche to learn which districts do not have standing school board representation. It's not necessarily the school boards you would imagine. school districts with very active student bodies. Some of them, I think there were maybe 6 or 7, did not have a standing school board rep. So that was interesting to us, whereas many of our smaller districts, where there are many less students to fill that role, had a much more active participant in terms of their student school board reps. So we're supportive of any questions.
Thank you. Senator Khan?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. In the same vein that one would want to take out not eligible to vote, because it makes sense to take out any student who's going to graduate during the term, is not an eligible candidate. Should that be taken out? And the reason why is because the next line says, should there be a vacancy at any time during the year, the school district will have a procedure by which somebody is appointed, or how they'll fill the vacancy. So it could be by appointment or by delegation to the junior class, something or another. Yeah, so.
Thank you for the question.
Why not let a senior be a school board member?
Thank you for the question. I think NHSBA's position is it's important to us to have school board voice, school board voice on your school board as a non-voting member. That was an important piece for us to ensure that it is a non-voting member. How that person is selected or in what way schools want to choose their student rep, we would certainly support that could be very individualized based on the district. So I think we would be open to looking at any kind of, supporting language that would allow for school boards to determine or school districts to determine how they wanted to select those student reps, whether that was through election, whether that was through some sort of nomination or designation by some other group, or whether that needs to be an elected student body position. I think that's up for the legislation to discuss.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So regardless, the student who gets elected or appointed to be on the school board is not a voting member.
Correct.
They can make their voice heard, make suggestions, give you information, but at the end, they do not vote.
Yes, that would be the intention. Thank you for the question. Anybody who's ever had a teenager will, I think, agree that often the adult perspective is not the same as the teenager's perspective, so it is important to hear those perspectives as they come to the table around topics that are affecting our students every day. At the end of the day, the school board are the elected officials. Students are not elected town officials. They were not elected by the voting members of that municipality, so we would like that to remain that they are non-voting members.
Okay, keep it that way. Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Alicia Likas?
For the record, Alicia Likas, I represent Hillsborough 37 Hudson College. And I support this, even though it does seem like a lack of local control, because there are plenty of things, as you know, that we vote on and pass into law that's not local.
Would you put your microphone on?
I'm very sorry. I even know that. Somebody asked me, well, couldn't students just go and talk to the school board anyways and give their opinion? And it's very difficult in some towns to actually get the address of the school board. There are only certain things on the agenda. It's very difficult to get things on the agenda. That's another whole issue that I know we have seen plenty of new bills about, and you will be seeing, and if you put some out, we will be seeing yours that have to do with currently parent testimony at school boards, but consider the same for students. And so having that perspective on at all of the meetings, that perspective of the students, because the students are living this, right? They're the ones who are being affected by the culture, by the rules, by the way the school is run. It's the students we're educating, and so they're the ones who are at most at stake. And so they're the ones we really need to hear from. How is it working? And there are things that school boards just don't ever hear about because they're not things that the superintendent or whoever wants to talk about. And they're important for school boards to know about so they can make reasonable decisions. I know when I was in school, I was very active when I was in school. I got a lot of things changed, like our dress code and a variety of other things from talking to the principal, from talking to the superintendent. But there were other things that were critical that really needed to go before the school board. And as far as my local school board was concerned, I was just a student. You know, my opinions didn't matter. And so they just dismissed what I and a number of other students came to report on. And it was unfortunate because I think it hurt quite a few kids, not us. It wasn't something that affected us, but we were seeing children being harmed, other fellow students being harmed, and we tried to bring it to our school board. And I think had we been members of the school board, had they known us personally, we wouldn't just be some kid. You know, we would have earned their respect. And then when we said, hey, this is harming these kids, they would have paid attention. And so it was from my personal experiences as a student that made me really want to support this, because I think those things are important for school boards to hear. So that's it.
Thank you. Questions? I don't see any. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sue Mullen.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair, and members for hearing me this morning. Senator Ricciardi, I have a question for you. Okay. Would you believe that Bedford, New Hampshire is one of the communities that does not have a non-voting school board member from the student body? Would you believe that?
I do believe that.
Yeah.
I checked.
I'm sure. I checked too, but unfortunately I checked during our hearing with Rebecca Wilson because there was a lot of discussion going on about how many school districts already have students on their school board. And I sat there and could not believe, because I knew that there was not a student on our school board, that this had not been enacted in our own communities. So I asked the question of Ms. Wilson when she was testifying. She called our superintendent from the room and asked the question, and I went home fearful that I was going to get called into the superintendent's office for being in trouble for shining a light on something that other districts had already done. Most people have given you ample fodder for why this should happen. What I have been surprised about, my interest, of course, came from sitting on House Education. I represent Bedford Hillsborough District 7, and the bill came before us. But prior to our hearing the bill, the union leader had a feature article on the fact that the student representative to the Manchester School Board had just written their dress code, and it had been adopted by the full board. Even though the student couldn't vote on it, the board accepted the dress code. I came into the hearing room that week, into our committee room, and I was talking about it, and I was surprised that virtually everybody else in the room said, oh, yeah, we've got a very active student representative. So it piqued my interest. I have also become aware of a number of legislators who actually served this role in their own high schools as they were coming through. I think the leadership opportunity is wonderful. I think the perspective taking is invaluable. And there are really so few opportunities for the board, school board, to get direct feedback from kids, that I would hope that we can find the sweet spot between shall and may, that perhaps each district shall have a representative, but they may do it in whatever shape or form makes sense for them. And perhaps that's the sweet spot. Thank you for hearing me.
Thank you. Any questions?
Just a comment. Just a comment.
Okay, you have a comment, Senator Shardy.
Thank you, Representative Mullen. It's always good to see you.
Yes, likewise, Senator.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anne-Marie Banfield.
Before o'clock. Good morning, good afternoon, I don't know.
It's
Good
11
morning.
o'clock exactly.
Good morning. For the record, my name is Anne-Marie Banfield. I am a parental rights advocate in New Hampshire, focused on academic excellence in education. I'm going to submit testimony in opposition of HB 1381. I'm just going to recap some of what was said. Clearly, I'm not opposed to a student sitting on the school board in the capacity that we have heard. Obviously, there can be some value in that. Like Senator Riccardi had said, my concern really is the mandate. This is a mandate. This seems to be working well, and schools are in charge of doing this. They're doing it on their own. Clearly, this is happening in many schools, and bravo to them. And in Bedford, you two ladies, if this is what you want, go talk to the superintendent, go talk to the school board. I mean, to me, is just so easy. And I do understand that, there are times where laws are necessary from the state. This just seems to be, you're looking for a problem that doesn't exist, and you're trying to fix a problem that doesn't exist. I don't see a problem. I haven't heard from parents barking about, we need to have more student representation on the school boards. I haven't heard any problems. What I've heard is that we just want to expand this into law. So that's mainly my concern. And I just want to hit up a couple more points that were brought up. I have to wonder, you are a governing body. If the federal government decides that you should have some kind of person on your committee, I mean, how do you take that? But maybe you, at the state level, determine that this might be a good thing for your committee. Do you see the difference? I think the difference is should we have the federal government saying how you should conduct this committee versus you at the state level determining that? Student voice is certainly important. We have public comments. You can be put on the agenda, and clearly many schools have that student representative already. And then, some of these policies at the school level do impact homeschool students. So why don't we ask a homeschool student to sit on the student body too, or as a school board member, as part of that body? Do you see there's different ways that, and if a school board decides that they want somebody from the homeschool community, again, bravo, but is this something that should be put into law? I would argue that it should not. I think that's about it. I think that all the arguments for it made sense in terms of it's already working. I think they made great arguments that this is already working. Do we need to go that step further and put it into law? And I would say no. So thank you for taking my testimony, and that's all I have to add.
Thank you very much. Any questions? I don't see any. Thank you very much. Anybody else in the audience who likes to contribute to the discussion? Seeing none, we'll close the hearing on House Bill, what is it? Can't see the name here. 1381. Thank you all for coming. I would suggest maybe a 5-minute break, and then we can come back and do some execing, or at least talk about some bills. I know, but they're just testifying at 11. I don't know when they do that. We will recess the Education Committee until 11:30, at which point we will go into executive session.
Move executive.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
You need to.
Motion
Aye.
was Senator Hennessy, seconded by Senator Prentice. Not a problem. Happy to help. 1653 FN is what we've got to, not
I think we have a
exact.
couple that we can just do right now. I'm looking at 1311,
Hold on. Pull her up.
prohibiting persons charged with convicted of certain assaults or controlled drug possession not to be able to work with children.
I have to get my folders out.
Yeah, there was something about that that I
Madam
was
Chair.
worthy
Yeah.
of talking about.
Yes, Madam Chair? Yep, thank you. We have another bill that's going to be a study all the different offenses that need to be put into place. And I'm sorry, I'm trying to figure out which one that is.
You're on 1311, correct?
1311, yeah. This particular bill adds one more thing to the existing list of
Right, I think it
offenses.
adds two things.
Yeah, it does.
And I think there needs to be more study on those two things and which specific individuals can or cannot have committed those offenses. The way the bill is written right now, I can't support it.
1311?
Yeah.
You have the whole list of things, and then they had added the possession of controlled drug with the intent to sell.
And 631-1, which is, I think that, is that some sort of, do you remember what 631 was? Sorry, I don't have my computer with
Hold
me.
on. 631. One.
It's an assault one, but I don't remember which one.
First degree assault.
Yep. I am not saying that these shouldn't be included. However, these would prevent anyone within this, in my understanding of the bill, who has ever committed any of these violations from ever being hired in a school system, including
Well, we're going to exec tomorrow afternoon, so we can. Oh, you're just, okay. I was hoping that we could do a couple of them today.
Does anyone know what the bill is that is going to study all of the offenses?
It's not on the list yet.
Could I just ask a sense of how everyone feels on this? I hear Senator Hennessy, Senator Prentice.
So I'm in favor of passing this, but what I will, I'd like to pass it, but I will point out, and I don't know if there's a way to do this, I was thinking about this during the hearing, so if you might indulge me for a second. When I worked for the Department of Safety and was doing licensing, in order to get an EMT license, you had to have a certain type of certification that was issued by a national body. And if that national body, they had a list of things that you couldn't have done in order to get certified. But they would, given so many years, review the case and then say, this person was involved in a domestic violence incident, 10 years ago. Here's what they have done to basically, well, what's the best, to change their ways, like they would have to demonstrate, and then that body would consult with, the certification body would consult with the state of New Hampshire whether we wanted to accept that or not. So I'm only sharing, because some things are just non-starters. And then there might be something where, can they come back in? So what's the way to review that so that we don't, what's the way to put a provision in here that protects the public but allows for a conversation or consideration, and who would be the appropriate
agency to do that. Y'all follow me? I'm just comparing this like past life that I had. And when we were hearing this bill, that's what I kept thinking, like, gee, we had a way to do that, but it was very, it was very specific.
I'm inclined to pass it just because I feel these are serious violations and it's a safety issue with the kids.
The bill that Senator Hennessy was talking about, HB 1398, which was McGuire's bill to establish a committee to study the feasibility of centralized criminal history records check in education. And I don't think that 1311 deals with that.
Madam Chair, I thought, and I don't see it,
Attorney Fenton
Which
is here, we
was-
can talk to her.
maybe Attorney Fenton, if you could take this question, which was the bill that we heard testimony on? And I thought it was Representative McGuire's that said they were going to look at the offenses that would preclude you from working in a school and possibly break it down by what your position within that school district actually was. Yep. Oh, Madam Chair.
For the record, Diana Fenton with the Department of Education. I do not believe that there's currently a pending bill that looks at that exact issue, Senator Hennessy. I think that came up as an offshoot of the discussion of Representative Sue Mullen's bill, which would add on 2 offenses to the Section 5 violations. I think both bills were introduced on the same day.
But the 1311 is what we're talking about right now, because have added drug with the intent to sell, and 61, whatever that is.
So, here,
First degree assault. It's on. Oh.
Senator Khan, just angle your mic towards you. There you go. Perfect. Excellent.
I would be against doing the 318B2. So I would offer, I mean, if we wanted to do something, I would offer to strike that. And the reason why is that the sentencing, which is defined in 326, for those possessions, they vary from 1 to 3 years to a life sentence. And, the life sentence for lacing fentanyl into other drugs and potentially seriously harming people, as opposed to something that is, after, as Senator Prentice said, after 3 years, maybe you've reformed and seen the light. I'd hate to prescribe that we're eliminating people who have committed something of a minor offense that have demonstrated that they're different people at that point in time. Yeah, so, all right, maybe we don't have the mechanism in place, but I think that this is, we're moving beyond what the intent of these other prohibition offenses are. So,
Senator Hennessy.
that's why.
Madam Chair, I want to let everyone know I agree with Senator Khan on this one. I think sometimes, based on the questioning that we had for, let me remember who it was that was speaking. I think it was Jesse O'Neill from the Attorney General's office. This could be an 18-year-old that was selling weed, something that this legislature is looking at legalizing. But I also want to point out that some of these people who have done this in the past, make the best teachers on why not to do this, and I've, sometimes schools actually hire these individuals to come into our school systems as motivational speakers, as why not to follow the path that I took in my life, and how to prevent bad mistakes from happening. And so if somebody has done something, an offense that we're actually looking to legalize perhaps in this state, I think it's premature to add that at this time. And so if we would like to remove that offense and in the future come up with a better definition around which offenses are actually offensive for the majority of the legislature, then I would be supportive of it at that time.
But on the other hand, these people are being invited to be inspirational speakers. They're not regular teachers in the school system all the time.
Based on my experience, there are some people that have done things like this, I believe, that are counselors in our school systems, and then this would prevent them from doing that.
Okay. Should we just think about it overnight and look at it tomorrow?
Can I just make one other comment?
Sure.
So I do, if you look at the hearing report, it wasn't any, like she said, Representative Mullins said, it's not, a joint in the glove box. It's not, an assault on a schoolyard so, I mean, it's more serious offenses.
Yep, and I'm not disagreeing with the, what was the name of the other offense? Criminal assault? First-degree assault. I'm not disagreeing with that one. My concern is around the vagueness of the intent to sell, and that it could be a small amount of marijuana when somebody was 18 and they've turned their life around, or a good citizen, and now we're saying, sorry, you can't, blah, 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 whatever it might be in our school system.
Well, let's think about it overnight and take it up tomorrow. I was looking at requiring DOE to provide these books before the start of the session.
I emailed Linda Tanner, she was here today. Wanted to talk to her about this before we execed it. But that's unusual for the time outside.
Well, the ones I was looking at, I can mention it to you. Mention to you now, so maybe we can spend tonight and tomorrow morning to look it over and read the reports and see how we feel we can vote. I was looking at 1398, establishing committee to study the feasibility of a centralized record place.
You start that one.
15.
I lost my pen somehow.
21, requiring the DOE to provide the House and Senate standing committees responsible for education by written copies, which we hear testimony that we're not going to have those written copies. 1653, relative a waiver of tuition, the university system and community college system for certain groups of people, like mostly military personnel.
Yep, Madam Chair, Senator Prentice and I are still working on an amendment to that bill.
Okay.
1653.
1193, relative to charter public schools fees and enrollment policy. They cannot charge fees.
What was that number?
1193. And I'd like to work on 1421, which has to do with relative to lead in school drinking water. And I think we all have an amendment from DES on that by Van and Kerner. he's working on it.
I have a question on 1193. Senator Khan noted that non-application fees are not defined in our statute, so I'm wondering, do we have an actual definition of what that is? And
An
can we,
application fee?
non-application fee for 1193. So if we were to pass this bill, it's kind of vague because it's, the term is not defined. So I'm in favor of it, but I think we need to actually define what a non-application fee is as a state.
Okay. Do you want a definition for what a non-application fee is?
I think that's important. We all rely on our experiences, mine being at the university level, but if I think about all the fees that colleges and universities charge, and the range that non-application fees could cover, it's quite a wide range. I think it would be valuable for any future guidance to have that definition. And I don't know if the department cares to render that. It was Nate Green who was the expert on this bill. I'd want to hold on it until we have that.
Okay. And somebody else had a question on a definition for fee for materials. So, okay, we have enough to do tonight and tomorrow morning before we meet at 1 o'clock.
So, Madam Chair,
Yes?
I just wanted to make note, as the aide, just to give everybody, so we're on the same page. April 19th, so 2 weeks from today, is the last day for the committee to exec out any bills with FNs, and we have 7. And I know it sounds like some of them are still in the works, but I just wanted to remind the members that that's the only time we have left to do that. On top of that, we still have 6 bills in committee that we have yet heard or scheduled. So bearing in mind those, we only have 2 more Tuesdays and tomorrow to hear all those bills and exec all those FNs.
So, from what we did today, I figure we have 6 more bills to hear, and that's it?
We, on the master sheet, you'll see there's 6 bills that we have yet scheduled, and I have not received confirmation yet whether or not we got a couple more from the House's session on Thursday. Once I get that confirmation of whether or not we are getting more, I'll let the members know. But as of now, yes, we still have 6 bills left unscheduled.
6 more.
And we have the 12th and the 19th. And then the 26th is the last day for the committee to act on all House bills, so 3 Tuesdays.
Yep, I know.
So just wanted to put that in.
We really need to make a dent in this tomorrow.
Yes.
Yeah, I think the bills we heard today there weren't that many lingering questions on them.
I think a couple of them are fairly straightforward.
Yeah.
But that's why I think that we won't discuss anything more about any particular bills, but take a look at them and read the reports and find out which ones you can exec out and if there's some minor tweaks that we need to do to them. It would be nice to get some of them, a chunk of them out tomorrow.
And we are hearing 4 bills tomorrow.
Yes.
Oh, we are? I thought it was just an executive
Not
session.
only 4 bills.
No, we have 4 bills tomorrow, plus an executive session. But we can go beyond 4, which is harder to do in the morning when you go beyond lunchtime. Well, the House has been having very long days. Some of them have gone way beyond. Oh.
No, I agree, they've been having long days, and we can afford to have a few long ones too.
So do I have a motion for get out of executive session?
Motion to end executive session.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, see you tomorrow, 1
And
o'clock.
And it's still 10 o'clock.
I know. We do very well here.
Oh my God, you read my mind.
So where's the lead in your room? And was it always a problem?
Is there lead in they give you?
Yeah. Well,
You
there's
have a
all these
copy.
warnings. Lead.
This is, so that's my amendment for 1663.
Maybe it says lead.
I hope you get a lot of it done tomorrow.
Yeah, so do I.
Something close.